1 minute ago, Westminster was shaken by a message so sharp, so direct, and so unexpected that senior MPs were seen rushing out of committee rooms with pale faces and trembling hands. A warning, not whispered, not hinted, but delivered with the force of a diplomatic earthquake from Vladimir Putin himself, a message aimed squarely at the heart of the United Kingdom, and more specifically at the men and women sitting inside the House of Commons. Within minutes, phones were buzzing across Whitehall. Social media erupted. Journalists sprinted down Downing Street, and for the first time in months, even Keir Starmer's government appeared visibly rattled, because this was not the routine posturing of global politics. This was not symbolic. This was not theatre. According to insiders, this was a message designed to humiliate, to bully, to dominate, and to force Britain into a corner. A message declaring that the UK had crossed a line and that consequences were now unavoidable. And as the news spread, the reaction across the country ignited like a fuse. It began just after sunrise when an encrypted diplomatic communication arrived unexpectedly at the Foreign Office. Officials assumed it was routine. Another round of stern language, another warning about sanctions, another complaint about UK intelligence activity. But this was different. The document was marked with the Kremlin seal and carried a blunt declaration. The United Kingdom had interfered beyond acceptable limits and Russia would respond proportionately. Inside Parliament, the phrase alone sent shockwaves through every political faction. Ministers whispered of escalation. Opposition figures accused the government of recklessness. Former security chiefs described it as the most confrontational message since the darkest days of the Cold War. And while the public had not yet seen the full text, the tone alone was enough to ignite national fury. Within hours, the Commons chamber descended into a storm. Starmer looked unusually rigid as he addressed MPs, his voice steady but noticeably strained. He insisted Britain had done nothing wrong, that the UK was acting with integrity, defending democratic principles, supporting allies and following international law. But his reassurances fell flat because the warning from Moscow wasn't simply a diplomatic complaint. It was a calculated move to expose fractures inside Westminster. And it worked. Tory backbenchers erupted, demanding immediate clarification. Reform UK MPs accused the government of provoking a global adversary without strategy or caution. Even Labour loyalists looked uneasy, shifting in their seats as the Prime Minister pressed on with his defence. What made this moment even more volatile was the sudden involvement of the intelligence community. Leaks, small at first, then widening, began slipping out onto late-night political channels. According to those leaks, the UK had allegedly taken part in a covert international operation that Russia claimed undermined its security. It didn't matter whether the claims were true. It didn't matter whether they were exaggerated or distorted. What mattered was the effect, and the effect was devastating. Moscow had thrown a match onto a political fuel tank, and Westminster was now burning with accusation, outrage, and fear. Outside Parliament, the reaction was immediate, and explosive protesters filled Westminster Bridge, waving flags, chanting slogans, and demanding full transparency from the government. Some accused Starmer of cowardice for refusing to reveal what actions the UK had taken. Others claimed that Britain should never bow to threats from a foreign leader. The atmosphere was electric, tense, and unpredictable, the kind of moment where a single statement from a minister, a single misstep, a single leak could send the entire political landscape into freefall. Meanwhile, inside Buckingham Palace, senior aides were reportedly briefing King Charles on the situation. Though the palace remained silent publicly, insiders spoke of concern, of rising anxiety, of the need for the monarch to remain prepared should a constitutional moment arise, because when a foreign power issues a warning to Parliament, it is not just a government crisis, it becomes a national one, and the monarchy, whether willingly or not, is inevitably drawn into the gravity of that crisis. Across the Atlantic, Washington reacted swiftly. The White House, visibly irritated, issued a brief but sharp statement backing the UK and condemning aggressive rhetoric. But even this raised new questions. Why was the United States suddenly involved? What was happening behind the scenes? Why did Washington speak before Downing Street did? And why was the UK government so slow, so careful, so rehearsed in its public statements? Inside number 10, Starmer held an emergency meeting with his top security officials. Advisors described him as calm but visibly exhausted, a prime minister under immense pressure. A leader cornered not just by a foreign warning, but by an internal storm of political doubt. Yet behind all the noise, behind all the defiance, behind all the public messaging, one fact remained unavoidable. Britain had been singled out directly, publicly, forcefully, and no one yet knew why. But the most troubling whispers of all came from an unnamed senior diplomat, a person who claimed that the warning from Putin contained a second paragraph, one that Downing Street had not revealed. A paragraph that allegedly spelled out what Russia expected Britain to do next and what would happen if the UK refused. The question haunting Westminster tonight is simple and terrifying. What exactly was in that second paragraph? And why is the government refusing to release it? The second wave of panic struck Westminster just after midday when an emergency intelligence briefing, originally scheduled for a handful of ministers, was abruptly expanded to include senior military commanders and key members of the National Security Council. The timing alone was a warning sign. Something inside that message from Putin was serious enough to force the UK into a rare cross-institution crisis mode. Inside the Cabinet Office, the tension was suffocating. Officials sat rigidly around the long oval table as thick folders stamped, restricted, Prime Minister only, were placed in front of them. Even seasoned intelligence veterans looked uneasy, speaking in low, steady tones as they explained that the Kremlin's communication went far beyond a diplomatic rebuke. According to their analysis, Russia wasn't simply warning the UK, it was setting conditions. And those conditions came with consequences that no British government, Labour or Conservative, could accept without appearing weak on the world stage. As the briefing unfolded, one revelation was so alarming that the room reportedly fell silent. Hidden within the second paragraph, the one Downing Street refused to release, was a demand for the UK to withdraw support from a key Eastern European ally. Putin framed it as a stabilising action. But intelligence experts saw it for what it truly was, an attempt to fracture Western unity and expose Britain as a wavering partner. To comply would be a betrayal of alliances built over decades. To refuse would risk escalating a confrontation with a nuclear power. It was a perfect trap, designed with precision, delivered at a moment of British political fragility, and Starmer knew it. Minutes later, the leaks began again. Anonymous officials, no longer able to contain the scale of what was unfolding behind closed doors, started whispering to journalists outside Parliament. The narrative shifted instantly. This was no longer about whether the UK had crossed a diplomatic line. It was now about whether the Prime Minister was capable of standing firm against foreign pressure, whether the government still possessed the backbone to defend the nation's moral and strategic commitments, whether Britain had a leader willing to face the foe or a leader prepared to bow in the name of political survival. And as those questions spread online, the public mood hardened. Protesters outside Parliament grew louder. Hashtags demanding transparency surged across social media. News presenters spoke with rising urgency. Britain was no longer reacting. It was erupting. Inside the Commons, the atmosphere turned poisonous. MPs clashed across the aisle, shouting accusations that echoed through the chamber. Tories declared Starmer weak and unprepared. Reform MPs accused Labour of hiding dangerous secrets. Even veteran Labour backbenchers demanded clarity and urging the Prime Minister to disclose the full content of the warning. The country has a right to know that, they said. Britain deserves honesty. But Starmer remained resolute, or stubborn, depending on who you asked, refusing to release the second paragraph for national security reasons. That phrase, repeated again and again, only deepened suspicion. Meanwhile, across Europe, allies expressed concern that the UK might waver under pressure. Statements from France, Germany and Poland praised British resilience. But the subtext was clear: they were nervous. They feared that the warning from Moscow had been designed to isolate the UK from its allies and destabilise Western unity. If the UK faltered, the entire geopolitical balance could shift overnight. And with whispers of internal division spreading across Europe, Putin's gambit was already working. Then came the palace. In a development that stunned the political world, Buckingham Palace released a short but pointed statement. His Majesty remains fully informed and deeply concerned about the evolving situation. It was a rare moment, a king stepping into the shadow of a geopolitical crisis, not through political opinion, but through the weight of constitutional symbolism. The monarch's voice, usually kept distant from daily politics, now hovered like a quiet but powerful reminder that the stability of the nation was at stake. The statement was brief, but its impact was seismic. Commentators interpreted it as a subtle nudge, or perhaps even a warning that the Prime Minister must handle the crisis with absolute clarity and integrity. But the most dramatic development of the day came from an unexpected source. A senior UK military commander, speaking off the record, told reporters that the nature of Russia's warning could not be ignored. "This is not rhetorical," he said. "This is strategic positioning, and the UK must respond decisively or be seen as vulnerable." That comment spread like wildfire, shaking the foundations of the government's messaging, because if the military believed the threat was real, the public would demand even louder answers. A new rumour began to swirl. A rumour claiming that Putin's warning included a deadline, a specific time frame, a moment by which Britain would be expected to respond or face consequences. Downing Street refused to comment. The Foreign Office dodged questions. Every minister interviewed on television repeated the same rehearsed lines. And with every refusal, every evasive answer, every moment of silence, the sense of dread grew heavier. Now, Britain is facing a terrifying question, a question whispered in pubs, repeated on talk shows, analysed by experts and feared by the nation. If Putin has set a deadline, what happens when that deadline arrives? As night settled over London, the crisis took its most dramatic turn, yet inside Downing Street, lights still burned as Starmer met privately with his closest advisors, wrestling with the impossible choice set before him. Outside, crowds surged against police barriers, shouting demands for answers as helicopters circled overhead. The whole country felt suspended in a moment of history, a moment where every decision, every sentence, every silence might alter Britain's future. And then, just after 11 p.m, a leak broke through the noise like a crack of thunder.